Scholars, welcome back. Let's read The Bracelet. Remember that as good readers, we are thinking about is this fact, a time, place, important person or event that was real from history, or fiction, apart from the story that comes from the author's imagination? Let's read The Bracelet by Yoshiko Uchida, illustrated by Joanna Yardley. Annie didn't want her big sister to see her cry. She wiped the tears away quickly, but couldn't wipe away the sadness inside. "It's almost time to go," her mother called, and Emmy knew they would have to leave their home soon. She looked around her room. It was as empty now as the rest of the house. Like a gift with no gift inside, filled with a lot of nothing. Emmy closed her eyes and tried to remember how it had looked. Flowered chintz curtains at the window, her clothes scattered everywhere, her favorite rag doll and teddy bear sitting on the chest. She could even remember how the whole house looked as if she closed her eyes and kept pictures of it inside her head. Scholars, why do you think Emmy and her family are moving? Tell me. Let's read on and see if your prediction is correct. Emmy and her family weren't moving because they wanted to. The government was sending them to a prison camp because they were Japanese Americans, and America was at war with Japan. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were being treated like the enemy just because they looked like the enemy. ELA Masters, I remember from what I read yesterday that this setting was a real thing that happened in the historical past. Let's review what just happened in the story. First, we heard that our main character, Emmy, her mother, and big sister are moving. Now remember, I need to ask myself, is this fact or fiction from the story? Well, I know that Emmy and her family are not real people. They are make-believe from the author's imagination. So I am going to move this statement that Emmy, her mother, and big sister are moving to the part in my chart that says fiction. Emmy, her mother, and big sister are not real people. This is fiction. Let's make sure that we add that to our Google form. So, number 1, Emmy, her mother, and big sister are moving. This is fiction. If you need to, pause your video and add that now. Good. Let's look at this statement that we read about in the text as well. The government was forcing Japanese Americans to move to a prison camp because America was at war with Japan, and Japanese Americans look like the enemy. You told me in your predictions that, yes, they were put in these camps because America was at war with Japan. And we know that during this time, Japanese Americans were sent to the camps because of their race. So this is a real fact. This did happen in historical past. Let's go ahead and add that to my section that says facts. The government did, in the past, force Japanese Americans to move to a prison camp because of how they looked. Let's add that to our Google form. Number 2, is this event fact or fiction? This was fact. If you need to, pause your video to add that now. Good. Let's keep reading. They were being treated like the enemy just because they looked like the enemy. The FBI had sent Papa to a prisoner of war camp in Montana just because he worked for a Japanese company. Scholars, where is Emmy's father? Tell me. Right. He was sent to a prisoner of war camp. Now, I need to ask myself, is this event from the story fact or fiction? Well, I know that Emmy and her family are not real people and come from the author's imagination. So I am going to move this to my section that says fiction. This is not real. Let's add that to our Google form. Emmy's father was sent to a prisoner of war camp. Is this statement fact or fiction? This was fiction. Pause your video if you need to add that now. Good. Now, even though this is fiction, I also read in the story that it seems that some Japanese Americans were sent to camps just because they work for Japanese companies. And scholars, this is actually a fact. Just as we read in our text yesterday, a lot of Japanese Americans were sent to the camps even though they didn't do anything wrong. So, number 4 from page 1, some Japanese Americans were sent to the camps just because they worked for a Japanese company. That is fact. Let's add that to our form. This statement happened in real life. Make sure that you have those correct answers, and let's keep reading. It was crazy, Emmy thought. They loved America, but America didn't love them back, and it didn't want to trust them. Friends, that's really tough. Imagine loving the country that you live in, but they don't love you or trust you back. This seems like a great opportunity if you're thinking or feeling anything to record in your journal. Remember, your journal can just be a blank piece of paper that I folded just like me, or even just a napkin that you can write on your thoughts. Emmy ran to the door when she heard the doorbell. Maybe, she thought, a messenger from the government would be standing there, tall and proper and buttoned into a uniform. Maybe he would tell them that it was all a mistake, that they didn't have to go to camp after all. Scholars, why do you think Emmy doesn't want to go to the camp? Tell me. Right. Now that we know that this is a historical fiction and it takes place during a real time in history, we remember from our schema that the camps were not fun places to be. And Emmy probably knows that and doesn't want to go. But when Emmy opened the door, it wasn't a messenger after all. It was her best friend, Lori Madison, who was in the second grade with her. She hadn't come to walk to school with Emmy, and she hadn't come to ask her to go roller skating. She hadn't come to show her a new dress or to ask her to go to the store with her either. She came with a gift, as though she'd come for a birthday party. But she wasn't wearing her good party dress, and she looked just as sad as Emmy felt. Here, she said, thrusting her gift at Emmy, it's a bracelet. It's for you to take to camp. Lori helped Emmy put on the bracelet. It was a thin gold chain with a heart dangling on it, and Emmy loved it the minute she saw it. I'll never, ever take it off, Emmy promised. Not even when I take a shower. Scholars, why would Lori give Emmy a bracelet? Tell me. Right. It seems like Lori knew that Emmy might be gone for a while and wanted something for her best friend to remember her by. That is really sweet. But why doesn't Lori have to go to or move away or go to an internment camp? Right, scholars. We know from our schema that Emmy is Japanese American, and only Japanese Americans were being required to leave their homes and move to these internment camps. So let's look at this statement. Lori gives Emmy a bracelet as a goodbye gift for Emmy to remember her best friend. Tell me, scholars, is this fact or fiction? Right, this is fiction. Good. Lori, just like Emmy and her family, is not a real person. She comes from the author's imagination. Let's go ahead and pause the video to write that in now. Number 4 was fact. Number 5, Lori gives Emmy a bracelet. Is this event fact or fiction? This is fiction. Lori is not a real girl. But let's think about how only Americans of Japanese descent, like Emmy and not like Lori, had to go to the internment camps. Fact or fiction? Right, this is fact. Lori is not Japanese American, so she didn't have to go to the internment camps. Let's add that to number 6. It was a fact that Lori didn't have to go to the internment camps. Only Japanese Americans like Emmy did. Let's keep reading. Lori gave Emmy a hug. Well, goodbye then, she said. Come back soon. I will, Emmy answered, but she really didn't know if she'd ever come back to Berkeley. Maybe she would never see Lori again. She watched as Lori walked down the block, turning and waving and walking backwards until she got to the corner. Emmy couldn't bear to watch anymore, and she slammed the door shut. When the doorbell rang again, it was their neighbor, Mrs. Simpson. She'd come to take them to the center, where all the Japanese Americans were to report. Come on, Emmy, get your things, her sister Reiko called. It's time to go. Emmy made sure her gold bracelet was secure on her wrist. Then she put on both her sweater and her coat so she wouldn't have to carry them. They could only take what they could carry, and her 2 suitcases were already full. Each family had a number now, and Emmy put tags with their number 13453 on her two suitcases. Scholars, why do you think that Emmy only has two suitcases when they're moving? Tell me. Right. Scholars, Emmy and her family could only take what they could carry in the text. Is this fact or fiction? Yes! If you said fiction, give me a high five. Right. Again, Emmy and her family are not real people. So this is fiction. Let's add that to number 7. Emmy and her family are make-believe from the author's imagination, so this is fiction. But I noticed that we know that from our schema, the internment camps were very crowded, and there was also not very much room for their personal belongings. And that could also be a reason why Emmy only had 2 suitcases. It looks like this reason is fact. Why might Emmy have only had 2 suitcases? Well, the internment camps, we know from yesterday's reading, were very crowded and probably didn't have a lot of space for people to bring their things. Let's make sure for number 8 that we write facts. And let's keep reading. Mama took a last look around the house, going from room to room. Emmy followed her, trying to remember how each one had looked when they were filled with furniture and rugs and pictures and books. They went out for a last look at the garden Papa loved. If he were here now, Emmy knew he would pick one of the prettiest carnations and bring it inside. "This is for you, Mama," he would say, and Mama would smile and put it in her best crystal vase. But now the garden looked shabby and bare. Papa was gone, and Mama was too busy to care for it. It looked the way Emmy felt, lonely and abandoned. When they got to the center, Emmy saw hundreds of Japanese Americans everywhere. Grandmas and grandpas and mothers and fathers and children and babies. Everyone was clutching bundles and suitcases, tagged with family numbers. Some people were crying, but most just sat quietly. Emmy's stomach was jumping up and down, and she wondered if everybody was as scared as she was. She touched the small gold heart on her bracelet and tried to feel brave. When she saw soldiers carrying guns with bayonets standing at every doorway, she was so scared that her knees began to wobble. "Will they shoot if anybody tries to run away?" she asked her sister. But Reiko just shrugged. "I don't know," she said solemnly. "Maybe." Soon, it was time for everybody to board the buses lined up at the curb. They would take them to Tanforan racetracks, which the army had turned into a prison camp. As the bus started down the streets she knew so well, Emmy kept her eyes on the window. They passed the Cato grocery store, where Mama used to buy bean curd cakes and pickled radishes. The windows were boarded up now, but Emmy saw a sign still hanging on the door. It said, We are loyal Americans. Hmm. ELA Masters, why do you think that this Japanese grocery store was closed? Tell me. Right. A lot of these people were also being shipped to the Japanese American internment camps, including the owners of these stores. I'm a loyal American too, Emmy thought. We all are. But the army didn't seem to think so. Hmm. Let's think about this event, scholars. Emmy saw a sign in the closed gate Cato grocery store that said, "We are loyal Americans." What do we think? Fact or fiction? Yes, this is fiction. Again, Emmy is not a real character. She comes from the author's imagination. But let's think about what Emmy was thinking to herself, that the army did not trust Japanese Americans, so they sent them to internment camps. Fact or fiction? Right. We know from our schema that Japanese Americans were sent to the internment camps because of their race. So this is a fact. Let's make sure that we add the answers to 9 and 10 in our Google form. When Emmy saw the sign in the Cato grocery store that said, "We're loyal Americans," that was fiction because Emmy is not a real character and Cato grocery store might not have been a real store. But the fact that they were being sent to the internment camps because the army didn't trust them was a fact. Make sure that you scroll up and you have all the correct answers. Good. Let's keep reading. The bus sped down to the water's edge and crossed the Bay Bridge, looking silvery in the sun. "Goodbye, bridge," Emmy whispered. "Goodbye, San Francisco Bay. Goodbye, seagulls." Emmy glanced at her sister, sitting next to her, and could tell she was trying hard not to cry. "Stupid army," Reika was muttering. "Stupid war." ELA Masters, it sounds like Emmy and her family live in San Francisco, which I know from my schema is a city in California. Is this a fact or fiction? Yes, scholars! If you didn't get tricked, say whew! Right, this is fiction. Yes, San Francisco, California is a real place, but Emmy and her family are not real people, so they can't have lived in San Francisco for real. But we do know from the text and from the text that we read yesterday and from our schema that many Japanese Americans lived off the western coast of the United States in states like California. And many of them were sent from their homes to live in internment camps. This is a fact. Good. Now, let's add that to our Google form. Emmy and her family are not real people, so the fact that they live in San Francisco is fiction. But it is true that many Japanese Americans lived in states like California and in cities like San Francisco, and many of them had to move to the internment camps. So this last part is fact. ELA Masters, Make sure that you're scrolling up and double checking which parts are fact and which parts are fiction. As I'm looking at my chart, I notice that a lot of the parts that are fiction have to do with Emmy and her family or friends. Anything that has to do with Emmy tells me that this is fiction because Emmy is not a real girl. She comes from the author's imagination. The parts that are fact are related to a lot of what we read about yesterday, the article internment camps. That's now a part of our schema. Masters, on the next page, you are going to try and figure out which statements are fact and which statements are fiction as we read. Go ahead and click next to continue.